Hey there. Hey, how you doing today? I'm sorry about the bad lighting. I know you're not going to be able to see me because it's just such a sunny and bright day today. November 2nd, 2022. Beautiful day. It's so warm and nice out. I want to just do a quick video on this book that I just finished by Carl Jung called Synchronicity. It's a short book. It's only about 115 pages, but it's very torturous to get through. Instead of making 10 videos on it, I'm going to make one video on it. So I'm going to summarize the whole thing in just one video. He wrote it in a style, well, it's translated from German, so it makes that difficult to read from the get-go. And he writes in a way that's over complicating things. It's very academic, and it's unfortunate because the whole thing could probably be summarized in a lot shorter. But be that as it may, what he's talking about is he's examining events that he's experienced firsthand and also events that he's heard about in his life that cannot be explained by causal forces. So he ends up building a model of reality where he says you have time, space, causal events, and the fourth element he calls acausal events or synchronistic events. Thus the term synchronicity. He calls synchronicity any event that occurs in a person's life or in our life that cannot be explained through causal forces. And he gives examples of astrology, extrasensory perception, premonitions, miracles, dreams, so on and so forth. Those kind of esoteric things that happen, and he calls those things synchronicity. And so it's quite a fascinating concept. His arguments on astrology are terrible because he starts with a bad premise and he doesn't explain the parameters that he's using for his argument. He goes through this long, convoluted explanation of the statistical studies he did about people that were married, and he looked at their birth and compared their different astrological signs to one another and then made conclusions based on that. And his conclusions was that the matchings were beyond chance, but he never explains the parameters in detail or what they signify or what reasons they would be matched together. And I could go on and on, but it's just a horrible, horrible argument. The experiments that were done, not by Jung, but by this other guy, I think his name was Klum, on parapsychology, on extrasensory perception, using 5 cards. They would take these 5 cards. One was a card of a circle, a star, wavy lines, a box, and something else, right? A circle, square, different geometric designs on these cards. They would shuffle the cards. There was a deck of 25, 5 different shapes. So 5 of 5 different shapes, 25 cards in total. You shuffle them up, hide them from the experimental subject, and then ask them to predict each card in turn as they would turn the cards over. Tell me, what do you think the next card is going to be? A circle, a square, squiggly line, a star, and so on. And so the people would have to guess what the next shape was. And this was much more interesting experiments that they did, because if you do this experiment, the average number of correct guesses should be 6.5 statistically. So obviously sometimes you're going to guess 6 correct, sometimes you're going to guess 7 correct. On average is somewhere in between those two number of guesses. I'm not sure why it shouldn't be 5 out of 25, but statistics can explain why the average correct guess rate is 6.5. And so when they did this experiment with people, especially when people, it makes a difference when people are excited about the experiment. Apparently, when they anticipate that it's going to be a good result, they do better than 6.5, and the performance is beyond chance, based on, you can calculate the statistics, and the numbers are like, this should be 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000, and remarkable thing is that they even had a test subject who was able to guess 25 out of 25 of the correct. Now, I don't know why that specific test subject wasn't um, covered in more detail, or because the chances of that happening are one in, like, trillions. It's beyond the number of atoms in I forget, but it's almost impossible event to happen. So he would explain this again through synchronicity. Other examples of synchronicity is that when he has a dream of something, he was studying the ancient symbolism of a fish, and then he had a dream of a fish, and then he saw a fish on the side of the road, and then someone offered him a fish for lunch, and he had 6 events in the span of a very short period of time that were all repeating that same image in his mind. And so this he called synchronicity again. So this is the subject of the book, synchronicity, right? When these events happen, there's a wasp trying to get me here. When these events happen that are beyond chance and that cannot be explained by typical causal forces. The other ones are people that had premonitions of a fire happening in a specific city, and then a week later a fire happens in that specific city, or a day later, or a couple of days later. The timing varies. Other times people have a dream of someone they know that passes away, and then it ends up coming true, so on and so forth. All these different events he catalogs in this book. And he mentions briefly that Leibniz explained these synchronistic events because of the way that God created our reality. And so I think Leibniz had a much better idea about it. Carl Gustav Jung is very wishy-washy. He wants to come across as an academic, but he doesn't want to agree with Leibniz in that this is the type of reality that God made. Schopenhauer, he also mentions briefly, but he doesn't offer any extra insight to it. But he kind of indirectly agrees with Leibniz without really coming out and saying it. He never really comes out and says that this is the way that God made our reality, and these instances of miraculous type of events are common to our reality. He's not willing to say that. All he's able to conclude is that it deserves more study from a empirical basis. It deserves to be studied more in depth. You recall the movie Men That Stare at Goats, that kind of study, and they try and see whether it's real or not. The problem with it is that it's never able to pin down. Even these experiments with the cards, as they continue on with these experiments, they become closer and closer to the mean because of people get sort of bored with it. But when they're initially introduced to this experiment, they often do far better than what the statistical odds are. So if you do it on your first try, it seems like you do much better than 6.5. You might guess 8 or 9 correct, maybe even 10 or 12 correct. But as you continue on, the performance seems to go down. So there's something there that is unexplainable. But there are these events that occur, but they're very difficult to replicate. They may only happen once in a person's lifetime, but they may be very, very significant. It's funny because I read an article yesterday about hospice workers. They have these homes where people go to basically die. They're terminal patients of different types of diseases, and they know they only have a few weeks or months to live, so they go into this hospice care. And the people that work there, they have to prepare them and teach them ahead of time that the people that come there, when they're ready to pass within 2 weeks to 2 months, a very short period of time, they need to prepare them because they will start to meet people that have passed on before them. They'll meet their old pets, in fact, and they'll meet their old relatives, or maybe they'll meet relatives that they never even knew in their lifetime, maybe great-grandparents that have passed on, and they'll meet them in the sense that they'll be able to speak to them in their room next to their bed, or they'll have these conversations with them, and it'll be very comforting to the person that's about to pass away, but it could be very startling to the aid workers or the nurses that are serving them. And so they actually teach them ahead of time, be prepared that this is more common than not, that the majority of the people that come there to die are going to have these experiences before they pass away. And sure enough, people come there, they're terminal, they're still lucid, they're still alert and able to communicate, but they'll say, oh, I just had a conversation with my great aunt who died 20 years ago. And, the person will say, well, there was nobody here. Well, and they'll say, like, well, didn't you hear them? They were talking to me right sitting in the corner of the room. And they're like, no, we didn't see anybody, that kind of thing. And so this would be another example of synchronicity. And the funny thing is that I've just experienced a synchronistic, I guess you could call it synchronistic event in my own life. A few days ago, as you know, I have heart disease and I'm dying. I don't know how long I'm going to be here, but I refuse to say that I'm dying for certain because they want me to undergo surgery and I don't want to undergo the surgery. And so several days ago, I was on the verge of going to the hospital once again because I was breaking down physically and also mentally. And so I felt that I needed to stop eating, to go on a fast. And so I did that, and I'm in the third day of that fast as of today. So I started on I believe it was Halloween, was the 31st, and then the 1st, and then today is the 2nd. So today is the third full day of only having water. And I felt a little better this morning, but then when I went out and wanted to walk around, I felt bad again. So, but the funny thing is the thing that makes it synchronistic is that the day after I started fasting, I watched a lecture, someone that's a video blogger on YouTube that had as a guest Michael Saylor, who I like to listen to very often. He's very intelligent gentleman who's trained at MIT as an astrophysicist. He trained in the history of science. He knows the history of science like no one else I've ever heard speak before, from the Romans and beyond and so on and so forth. And so I was listening to Michael Saylor, and in his talk that he gave, he mentioned inflammation as a society and inflammation on a personal level, how problematic it can be. And that topic was extremely insightful to me. It meant a lot to me. And so based on that, I decided to fast also from social media. And I found actually it was more difficult to fast from social media than it was from food, because the habit, the tendency to log into Twitter and to read all the shit posting that goes on is very compelling. It's very difficult to stop that reflex to go in there and say, oh yeah, this is what's happening in politics, this is what's happening in the world, and to get disturbed by it. So I'm trying to cut that out for a specific amount of time. And even Facebook, I'm not going on as often as normal. But the funny thing was, in that his talking about inflammation, he mentioned that most diseases can be cured simply by fasting. And he mentioned a book by Upton Sinclair, which was written, Upton Sinclair was one of the original muckrakers, they call them, was a journalist that stirred up trouble. And he wrote this book. He wrote over 100 books. Upton Sinclair was a prolific writer, and he wrote it around the turn of the century, around 1900. He lived from the late 1800s to 1906, somewhere around there. He lived 90 years old, so he lived a long, healthy life, but he suffered many, many ailments before he tried fasting. And he did 2 fasts of significant note. And one of them I know was 12 days long. I don't know how long the other one was. And he felt that it totally healed his body and it totally transformed his entire physiology. And so I don't know if I can last 12 days, but I'm in my 3rd day. And so I found that was so unusual that I started fasting. And then it was the next day that I saw that lecture by Michael Saylor. Then I downloaded that book, The Fasting Cure. It's in the public domain. It's available for free download off of Gutenberg.org. So I downloaded that and I started reading that last night. I had to wake up. I downloaded it and said, oh, I'm going to read that later. But it was so compelling that I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning this morning and I felt I had to start reading it. and I've already gotten a third of the way through. And the way that it's written after reading this is like trying to climb up, it's like walking through quicksand, and all these philosophers from the 1600s to the 1800s, it seems, talked in that way. They were trying to sound eloquent, or they were trying to introduce complex vocabulary, which was totally unnecessary. And the beauty of Upton Sinclair is he doesn't go for any of that. He just speaks from the heart. And reading it is like drinking water. It's so easy to read that the pages just flow. You can just read it just like harmoniously. It's like the difference between trying to ride a bicycle up a hill when you're reading this, and then you read Upton Sinclair, and it's just like you're coasting downhill. It takes no effort to read it. And even though some of the terms are old, he talks about all these old terms, the croup and the grip and pleurisy, and taking fevers and so on and so forth. It's got its own flavor of that old-fashioned type of speaking about ailments, but beyond that, there's nothing complex about it. Everything else is just smooth sailing. So I read through a third of it. I'm going to finish it. It was originally just a couple of articles that were written for Cosmopolitan magazine. It tells you how old Cosmopolitan magazine is, that it was popular in the 1900s. And he talked about how many letters people sent him about wanting to know about it and whether it would work for them, or how long they should fast for. And he got all these inquiries from people sending him letters. No social media back then. And so he wanted to respond. So he made a second article, and the combination of those two articles he eventually put into a book called The Fasting Cure. It's by Upton Sinclair. It's available for free download. I guess I'll put the link for it after this in this comment section, if that helps. But it's easy to find. I may add that for you. And so that's strange that it was synchronistic to have that all happen at the same time. And so maybe I'll start to feel better. Like I said, I'm in the third day, and the first day in this, it's funny because you get ravenously hungry at very bizarre intervals. Maybe twice the first day, a couple of times the second day. Right now I don't feel it. Excuse me, I'm just having hiccups here. Right now I don't feel any hunger at all. But I do feel a little bit weak, and I did feel a little bit bad when I tried to go out and move around. But when I woke up today, I felt a little better. So I'm going to see how long I can last. I may extend it. I was only planning originally to do 3 days, and so I would finish my fast tomorrow morning with a little bit of grape juice. But after reading Upton Sinclair, he did it for 12 days, and he finished his fast by having a little bit of orange juice, and then he would have a lot of milk. He said that he had a lot of milk, and the first time he did it, it felt really good. But the second time, the milk didn't mix with him. I'm not good with milk, so I'm not gonna do that. But I'm gonna slowly go back to only whole foods and fruit juice, whole foods, a little bit of nuts, and as much from the garden as I can. So anything like carrots, raw carrots, raw cucumber, and raw lettuce, and maybe raw kale or whatever else I can, tomatoes. I'm going to go back to a very, very small amount when I come off the fast. So I don't know how long I'm going to last. It's either going to be tomorrow morning, and then I may try taking a little bit of grape juice. But I may extend it to the full 12 days depending on how I can go. But that's it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. God bless you. I love you very much. I know God loves you, and He cares about you, and that synchronicity is a part of the way He made it our creation. All we have to do is open our eyes, and synchronistic events will appear. I think they're much more often than Carl Jung thought, and I think they can happen even every day if we're more in tune and aware to what's going on. I hear the birds flapping behind me. So God bless you. I hope you have a blessed, blessed day. I love you, and take care of yourself. Be good, get some fresh air, and be good to your heart because it's very fragile. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.